Good morning. I'm Bill Liebens with AXPONA. Our panel this morning, we have Michael Fremer from everywhere. We have Shane Bettner from Intervention Records, which apparently has nothing to do with rehab. We have Julia Miller.
Mine was all about rehab.
Not this time. Julia Miller from Delmark Records, Chad Kassem from Acoustic Sounds, and God knows what else. We've got A.B. Phone from Impex Records, Elusive Disc, and multiple other ventures. So Michael's quite capable of handling this.
Thank you. We're an entrepreneurial group of people here. So I thought I would start. These are all important people because they are entrusted with putting out reissues of much of our favorite music, some of which really needs reissuing, and some of which maybe not, but most of it does. So the first question I want to ask you is about a record that none of you reissue, and I want to know what you might do under these circumstances. Okay, and it's a record that Rhino High Fidelity released. It was television's marquee move. Some of you know that record.
Yeah.
So let's say you want to release this record as a reissue, and you get the tape. There's no notes in the tape, but you learn that it was recorded at A&R, Phil Ramone's A&R Studios, one of the finest recording studios. Phil Ramone, one of the great legendary engineers. You get that part of it down. You see where it was done, and then you see that it was mastered at Sterling Sound by Greg Calvi, another great mastering engineer, and Lee Hulka, who started Sterling Sound. He was one of the first people to really get and understand what that mastering chain could do, and putting a name to it and a brand to it could do. And then it was pressed and released, and it was co-produced by Tom Verlaine, who was the guitarist. And that original pressing has a particular sound to it. And you're putting this out as a reissue, and that sound is very strident and bright on top, and not a lot of bass on the bottom. And the question is, when you hear that original, I assume you all listen to original pressings before you do a reissue as a reference. Do you make it sound more pleasing to your ears, or do you give people what the original sounded like? Because it seems that how that was done was what Tom Verlaine, the guitarist whose music is all at the Up Rockers, would have wanted to have released. I just want to get all your takes on how you would approach that.
Well, what you're describing there is a really interesting kind of fork in the road when you decide to reissue records. Are you going to try to make a replica of an original or some sort of copy? Maybe like sometimes describe it as a wax museum kind of thing. Or are you going to go after the performances captured on tape? And I would say what I learned from my friend Joe Harley, who's been so involved with the Blue Note reissues over the years and why they're so spectacular. Joe and Kevin go after what's on the tape. And I've taken that approach almost exclusively. Now that being said, you're right. Last year I did the Peter Frampton box set, which you heard and listened to. And the album Frampton was a really good example. What was on the tape, our first go around after that, which actually got approved by Peter and Chuck Heinlein, his guys. I listened to it, and I listened to my original, and I'm like, this isn't exactly the record. It was never going to be exactly the record. People are hopefully better, quieter chain and everything else. But Peter's vocal, people are used to him being up front. The drum sounds are punchier, more, coherent, and I actually told Peter, I said, I know you proved this. I said, but once I got it home, I heard something different, and I don't feel like it's the record that people are going to remember. These are some of your most, cherished songs, and we took another run at it. And in that time, we nudged it more towards what people used to, because it didn't serve Peter's performance as well. And I really felt that strongly. And it was recorded in a castle, so the recording and stuff was very different. It was very clear that they did capture, and then they really did more in the mastering than they were kind of, I kind of look, they say that great wine is made in the vineyard, not in the winery. I look at, the tapes are the same way. The performances are on the tapes. They're not for us to kind of make it happen there. But with that record, it was, and that's what people were used to. So I nudged it back in the direction where I usually was.
And you had Peter there to approve it.
But he approved the first one. He loved it, and it had a lot of merit to the space that they recorded and everything else. But his performance wasn't.
Did he like what you did to it?
He did, and he was thanking.
That helps a lot to have the artist still alive when you're doing your research.
Yes, and involved in every step of it. I love working on artist-approved process.
So how would you approach something like that?
Well, I wouldn't, I wouldn't fix it. I mean, I would go for making that record into what we would hear now. I would go back to the original performance. I deal with this a lot because of the 600 masters that we have, and making these, whether to repress these things or then remaster and make new versions. And there's a wild variation between all of the different vinyl versions that we have. And so it's a large process making a unified catalog and also making it sound well on the systems that we have now. So I would go with a performance that was original and then making that sound, not try to recreate it.
Yeah, and I think it depends upon whether the original was not done properly, in other words, if it was a bad mastering engineer or a bad master. But in a case where they spent a lot of money on it and the best people did it, it seems you have clues as to what might have been desired. That's my take on it.
Yes, but if it's a vinyl too, it could also have to do with the pressing and the record itself, and how that dealing with that is the next step in the process. And I would look at that, go back to the original recording, and then compare that with a new pressing that we would, or a test pressing that we would make.
Chad, how do you approach a situation like that?
Well, we want to make it the best sounding version we can. And a lot of originals, we think we can make it sound a lot better. So we just ask them, well, we'll send them the original, or the mastering engineer will make sure he has the original or the best copy that we like out of everything that's come out. Say, hey, we really like this one. But we'd rather them try to beat it than try to match it. Because, I mean, a lot of those original albums are bright and shrill, and we think we can beat them. And, I mean, you know, how do you know that guy was at the mastering, was at the mastering session?
Well, Tom Verlaine was also the co-producer of the records. He didn't just play on it. So,
But do you know he was at the mastering for sure?
Well, we don't know if he sat in on the mastering. We certainly know that if he was the co-producer, he probably got to hear it before.
But probably.
We don't know.
Okay, that's what I think. You don't know. And, you know, I guess it's all in like the eyes or the ears of the person listening. And you might like the way the original sounds. We want to try to please the most of everybody.
And you faced that issue, before we get to Amy's view on this, you faced that issue with Teeth of the Tillerman, right? Would you want to talk about that a little bit? Spill the beans, as it were?
I mean, the original Tea for the Tillerman, the British, was very warm and rich. And the new one had more detail and it was a little bit brighter. And it's just a trade-off, like, what do you want? You know, some people like, in fact, you know, I've tended to like the warm and the rich and the smooth.
And why was it that way? There was a story behind that. Don't you want to spill the beans on that story? Or no?
I mean, it sounds like you remember more than me, so go ahead and spill the beans.
Well, so many years have passed. Why not spill the beans? So apparently the story is both an A&M original and the UK Pink Label Island, which goes for a fortune still. They're both mastered at Sterling Sound by Lee Hulko. If you look on the inner groove, it's both Lee Hulko Sterling Sound. One was plated and pressed in the UK, one was plated and pressed here. And the first thing it shows you is the difference in plating and pressing. It makes a huge difference. But the warmth on that, you know, he was playing, Kassem was playing an Ovation guitar with a plastic back. When you strum on that thing, it's like a cheese grater. It goes right through your eardrums. But that record, that original pressing, was very warm sounding. His guitar did not sound like an Ovation guitar. And the story goes that Lee Hulko accidentally put the Dolby on and decoded a non-Dolby recording, and that's why it sounded warm. That's the story now. Do you know anything about
Well, I mean, I remember it said stretched Dolby on the tape, you know, and anyway, we think that Marino's, the one we did, sounded better, But if somebody that likes the warm, rich, smooth, rolled off, they're gonna like the original better. And sometimes, it's more pleasing to your ear because it's not as bright. And so I get tricked with that sometimes too, where I like that warm, rich, smooth. But you lose
Yours sounds like an ovation guitar. He's playing an ovation guitar when he strums an artist like.
Right, we liked what George did better, but when you listen to that, the original's nice. There's a reason why we wanted to reissue to begin with. It's such a good recording, and it sounded so good. I like having them both, and it's weird. I haven't really A-B'd the American versus the British, but it's the same parts, same mastering, and everybody still pays $300, $400, $500 for the British.
Yeah, they like that pink label.
Yeah, I love the pink label.
How would you approach a situation like that, A.B.?
I don't have a formula that fits for every project. We look at every project individually, but based on the example you gave us, I like to go in with original or multiple copies of various pressings. We listen, we evaluate, but I like to stay with what is on the tape. I believe that is what the artist intended. If there's problems on the tape, we try to reach out to the estate, the artist, depending if they're still around. But I tend to also agree with Chad, when we're listening to the tapes, I'm listening to the musicality of it. Does it sound good? Does it speak to me? And if it's really, really bright, really shrill, then, we might roll it back to be slightly more pleasing so it's not so in your face. But I like to keep my sound more in line with what the tape sounds like and what the original press is.
So in the case of the Blue Notes, we know that Rudy Van Gelder had to compress it so it wouldn't skip out of the groove on the inexpensive turntables that most of those people had. And he had to roll the bass off the bottom end for the same reason, and he boosted like 90 hertz and lower mid bass to, just to give it a sense there would be some bottom end. Yeah, and that there are people that think that's the original Rudy Van Gelder sound and he wouldn't want that touch. Well, we know that's not true. But there's still these people that insist that that's what that record should sound like. So
yeah, and it's funny, I told the Peter Frampton story, but generally, Amy and I are very much in line, and actually Chad, the same thing. I often talk to you, if I'm doing something you're familiar with, Mikey, what's the go-to for this record? And I always have that in mastery, because Chad's point, we always want to exceed it. Not just be, and sometimes, they might have a lot in common with the original pressing, but the mastering change, the better vinyl that Chad's pressing, that, we all get these, today's great pressing plans and stuff like that, will result in a better experience. But, to Amy's point, I did one of my early records was a Joe Jackson record called Look Sharp, and it was angry young man British music, and there was way more bass on the tapes than anybody had ever heard before, so that was beautiful. But the top end still had some spit and grit on it. And Kevin and I'm like, God, that does have some bite to it. But Kevin Gray, my mastering engineer, who I'm referring to there, I've worked with a few guys, but most often Kevin. When you rolled it off, it just wasn't the same record anymore. And I still get complaints. People say they're getting semblance of stridence. I'm like, yes, you are. Because that's what's on the tape. That's what Joe and the band did. And if I tame that, the baby goes out with the bathwater.
And it's interesting too, because it has to do with the pressing too, the physicality and the consideration for the record.
It's having these playback systems.
And even playbacks and what they're used to from that record. It doesn't necessarily mean you can't, if you go back to the tape, that you can't make a better or different version, or it's a better different version.
Well, we better, because it costs a lot to do what we do. I always tell people, I can make it better, and I can give you a great record. I can't make it cheap.
For sure, and I find this, for sure, that's totally true.
if the artist is still alive, do you think you have a responsibility to get it to the artist and get their input on it, or no?
100%. Yes, 100%.
I try to get artist approval in everything I do, either before the projects. Like some projects never come to me through the artists I've worked with before. But yes, I always try to reach out. Sometimes it goes well, and sometimes not so much.
Sometimes they don't care.
Sometimes they don't care, don't want to be involved. Joan Armatrading didn't want to reach out, didn't want to be, involved or anything, tried to get all of her, it depends. And then there's people who want to be like...
Was she happy that you paid attention to the record and did it, or she didn't care one way or the other?
Really didn't get any feedback one way or the other.
Interesting. I interviewed her, she was very nice. I did my impression of her, I called her Joan Voicey training, and she thought that was fun. Okay, so now let's talk about issues involved in getting tapes out of record labels. There was a time not that many years ago when you could get whatever you want, and I know that Bernie Grundman had master tapes sitting in his place. Like, you go back there 2 years later, Bernie, Led Zeppelin is still sitting there. Bernie, the 3-track master of Kind of Blue is still sitting there. And he goes, I know, I call them to pick it up, but they don't pick it up. And that's how it was maybe 10 years ago. And now you have trouble getting tapes. So any great stories that you can tell us about getting tapes? No great stories?
Well, Delmark has our master tapes, so it's not an issue. And I don't.
That's not fair.
And do you have still have metal parts from back in the day?
We have some metal parts, but also most of our metal parts are at the presses that we work with. But we have all the tapes. And every other format as well.
Yeah, right. Cassettes, 8-tracks. Wire recorders.
We have 8-tracks. We do Amazon 8-track. Yeah, I love 8-tracks.
That's not coming.
Shouldn't say that here. Sorry, it's true.
Chad did the 75th anniversary of Crosby, Stills and Nash. That's pretty astonishing. And at the same time, the Electric Recording Company did a version of it. They got the master tape in Europe, and their take on these tapes is to give the customer what's on the tape, literally. So that reissue is just what's on the tape. And I would say that 99% of you would not want what's on the tape. It sounds dead. I mean, whatever that was done to that tape for your cut is like miraculous. What did they do?
Well, I used the parts that Bernie cut for Classic Records probably in maybe 98 or 96, something like that. We got the master tape. I thought, let's give it another go, see if we can't beat what Bernie did, back for Classic. And we got some new parts, and we compared it to we compared what Bernie did for Classic to the one step. That was easy. That didn't have to listen to that twice. We compared it to all the other versions that we had, the Nautilus, everything, and the Classic beat them all. But I still went ahead and invested the money and tried one more time to see what they could do. We couldn't beat what Bernie had did to begin with. I mean, it was like perfect. And if you listen to the original of that album, it sounds like hell. I mean, like nobody would want to try to match that.
It was bad when it came out. I remember when it came out and played it. It was terrible when it first came out.
Yeah, it's such a good album that I think that, it still was able to be a big hit and people loved it. But man, it just sounded like hell. And most versions did. And we couldn't beat it. And I'm like, man, what am I spending money for? I've got something perfect right here. So sometimes, you waste a lot of time and waste a lot of money trying to make it better. And the other thing in mastering, if you improve this side suffers. So, I mean, you can give it more bass if you like bass, but the other side is going to suffer. So it's real tricky, it's real hard, and, some people some people love their originals, no matter what. The originals to them is always going to be the best. It's the original, and sometimes the originals are hard to beat, but we feel like we beat them most of the time. But it's like Doug Sachs said, it's easy to beat a bad job, but it's hard to beat a good job.
Yeah.
And, there was a lot of bad jobs, but there's some good jobs. And sometimes you're having Bernie compete with himself. Bernie cut the original, and now, 30 years later, he's competing with himself. But like, for instance, if we're doing it at 45, that gives you a real head start to beat, easier to beat the original. And sometimes he can do it real easy. Sometimes you need to do it a few times. And sometimes, we found ourselves going backwards. you know, the first thing he did was actually awesome, and we keep thinking we can get better, and we're going backwards. And
So what's it like now dealing with major record labels to get tapes, to get reissues done? What is it like?
It's hard. It's hard these days. Back even 10 years ago, I remember we would have access to the original. But nowadays, there's few exceptions. Sometimes we can still get original, but we get a flat one-to-one transfer. So now, knowing that I'm going to get a flat one-to-one transfer, I put the energy in making sure the transfer is from the original. I look at who's doing the transfer and even how it's transferred. And been working with Sony lately. I've been working with my friend Chuck Granada, who has been able to go to the Battery studio to oversee the transfer. So I'm having, if I'm not there, I have multiple eyes that can help. Of course, you know, the original's the best, but
I mean, do you pay attention to what machine they're using to play it back on and,
yes,
and make sure it's
we
the
take
right?
pictures of that just to have evidence, you know. To know whatever.
we ain't having no problems getting the masters. You know, the only one is Sony, but we have so many parts from, you know, the classic that we just go to that.
You're lucky to have those. That was a good investment, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm lucky, but I paid for it. You know what I'm saying?
I know you did.
The harder I work, the luckier I am.
But you had the foresight. You were smart enough to see it.
And Chad, you actually had metal parts from the Library of Congress for some really early stuff, and you made some pressings of it, and they didn't sound so great, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, some parts are good, some parts are bad. Some parts we had that got damaged. You know what I mean? You can damage, but on the other hand, some of them can last for 100 years, you know, if they were treated right. So we treasure the parts we have. I mean, we've reissued reissues. You know what I'm saying? We've reissued like twice. You know, like the Janician we did in, 92? We've done it like 3 times, but now I think we've milked it to where we're going to let that one go.
How did the universal fire affect all of your operations? Somehow things came out that supposedly were gone, but they weren't.
I've had the good or fortune of a preponderance of the titles I've done have been from the A&M catalog. When Universal acquired A&M in the 90s, they engaged in the A&M safety program. They made half-inch safety copies of the library. So I've done probably a dozen or more, and they just have beautiful sounding half-inch safety copies from the 90s. With Peter's stuff, we had contemporaneous tapes from Olympic, some tape copies from Apple Studios, from England, like contemporaries at the time. Chris Bellman and I compared them to just, in fact, it was funny, one of the tapes was a 1/4 inch. He says, oh, Bernie may have done the Pepsi challenge with this. 1/4 inch always beats half-inch. He gave me 30s wide stuff. I said, yeah, okay. And I didn't know which way it was going to go, really. But the half-inch safety copies that they made in the 90s ended up being the best sounding source. So a whole bunch of that stuff was backed up. I've really only went into one project where, in one instance I'm aware of, that I don't want to say the artist and the title, but a master tape and its safety copy were stored right next to each other, which means the safety was not a safety. If it's with the master tape, it's not a safety anymore.
So where are your tapes located? Here in Chicago?
They're located at our facility. I'm looking at preservation and restoration right now, and whether to move them or not. You know, my situation is different than the other situations in that I came into this 5 years ago, and it was definitely an organization and a restoration and preservation project. And so now I'm in the place of, okay, which tapes which tapes really need preservation the most, which ones need to be reissued, and how do I balance all of these reissues and the new LP versions, and that's what I'm choosing now. It's a transitional period. It was sort of the end of the last 5 years, and now the next 5 years of where it goes. So it's a little different situation.
And where do you master your records and press them?
I work with several different presses. The last two I work with Memphis Vinyl, but I also we work with you guys, and also a couple of other presses as well. I work with Smash Plastic in Chicago, but a couple of small presses. And I work with mastering engineers, recently worked with Harry Brotman, and also Carl Zapp does a lot of our mastering in Chicago. I do some mastering, remastering as well, I'm an engineer. But in terms of our reels and our tapes and our high-end mastering, you know, there's a much greater knowledge with specific machines. So I would look to people like Harry, who have that, well, I think 50-year history. And also it's interesting too, because he knows the equipment in the Delmark studio because he worked on that equipment as a 20-year-old. That exact Unitech and all that stuff. So, you know, it's a nice, it comes back around that way.
So now, we've talked a lot about vinyl, but let's talk about SACDs so you do SACDs.
I sure do.
You do SACDs?
You know, they did, I have not. They did before me, they did. There were a few.
Chad, you do them.
Yes, and man, people are really starting to get on us about, hey, we want more, and why are they taking so long? And you know what happened was there was 2 pressing plants that did the SACDs, and one of them closed, and they just threw away all the masters, like all our masters, all the parts. They didn't call us, didn't ask us, they just, and so now every time we want to repress the SACD, we have to make new parts. No, I mean, it's not, we don't have to go back and remaster, but it's still probably $1,000 if you want to put a price on it. But like when we go back to do the Pink Floyd, you know, James Guthrie's such a fanatic that he has to go through the whole process. You know, it took a year to get him to approve and to, I mean, he hear things, talk about audiophile. I mean, nobody in here is like James.
How do those SACDs sell? Are they similar?
They do. You know, Chad's experience might be different because, you know.
Well, we sold about 100,000 Wish You Were Here. Is that good?
That's not bad. You don't get any SACDs yet.
I have a few. I don't do a lot. I do. I have a few SACD titles, but now I'm incorporating more into my vinyl players. So when I do a vinyl, I'm going to also do SACD. But it's title by title for me. I'm more known for vinyl.
I mean, then it's not. I mean, realistically, you know, 1,000, 2,000. You know, if you do Steely Dan Asia, maybe 10. If you do like a good jazz verve or something, maybe 1,000, maybe 2.
That's more realistic. Yeah, the vinyl is bigger. It's a bigger audience. Even talk to, a friend of mine who works at one of the big labels, working on big time reissues for them. And I said, hey, you're leaving some money on the table. I'm not going to tell you, to Chad's point, that there's always going to be 100,000 people, or even 5 or 10, but 2,000 to 3,000. There's a rabid audience that wants it and buys it. When you put something out that resonates, they grab. And the other thing that happens, I've done a few things with extra tracks and some other things from the 80s and 90s, like the Church Starfish and all things. It's not in circulation on CD anymore, and I've got an expanded edition with a bunch of really terrific extra tracks, and that just kind of keeps moving on.
Yeah. I was going to say, in our situation, it's, Bob Sr., the previous owner, was a vinyl guy. So LPs were really his thing, and so we're developing new products and he was not the one that was so even into CDs, for example, at all. But the reason why the catalog exists in the way it does is because there was someone there who was, So he developed things towards his retail situation. We work on artist development, and so if there is a certain product that an artist might want, or if we think it's a new audience, then we would work on that. But it's kind of definitely a reroute, so it's a little bit different, kind of thing.
I also agree with Shane that sometimes, there's only so many tracks that you can put on the LP, so SACD is a great way to give customers who are fans the original format plus bonus materials.
That's
Of
a
the
really good
session. Yeah, it's a good point. And it's 2 different markets.
I had to be talked into it, by the way. I've got a great group of people who follow my label on the Hoffman forums, and they really there were some the people who were into it, very into it. They really pushed me into it in a big way for my business, especially during the vinyl crunch a couple of years ago. SACD, frankly, saved my butt.
Are there any titles that you've released that sold way bigger than you expected, or didn't sell as well as you expected?
For me, Saturday night in San Francisco, the fall of the Friday night in San Francisco, we were focusing on the LP. We knew we had a strong market for that, but we were quite pleasantly surprised how well received the SACD sounded. It sold, I think we probably close to 10,000 units.
That's nice.
That's a platinum in SACD world. That's a lot. The question you just asked, I can't believe how many Genesis we sold on this last reissues. I mean, it's not a band I really knew too well, but man, obviously everybody else knows it real well because we keep running out of it and repressing it. And even the $120 one, they buy it like it's a $10 record. I mean, so Genesis really surprised me. So a good surprise. I mean, try to think of a bad surprise.
I've wiped it from my memory.
Yeah.
What's the one title that you really want to do that you haven't been able to get for each of you?
Okay, mine's easy. Jerry Rafferty, City to City, double 45s. I've been dying to do it ever since. And this is really funny. Well, I'm not going to tell that story. There's a bit of a barrier that is very surprising that I'll only tell in private. But I love that. Steelers Wheel was my first 2 records. You turned me on to Ferguson Park, especially Jerry's first solo album. City to City would be my goal.
I hope you get Can I Have My Money Back? That's the one I really love that record. Okay. Anything that you have a different situation.
It is different, but
whatever you want to do, you can do.
Yeah. When people ask about our classic or avant-garde jazz, like Joseph Charman, we could bringing that back because that's been out for a long time ago. Pia, Muhal, Richard Abrams, and also Chad. We talked about Junior Wells on tap.
I'll master and press it for you.
Okay.
And you've got a jazz catalog as well as a blues catalog.
Absolutely.
And would you market that differently, the 2 different musical genres, and bring it to a different audience in a different way?
Of course, for sure. Yeah. I mean, they're completely different. Yeah.
Chet, what's gotten away from you? Anything?
There's nothing. No.
Just because I just think Jerry Rafferty.
There's a lot of things there's the obvious that hasn't been accomplished yet, and we don't even have to, everybody knows what we're talking about, but we're still working on it.
You keep it close to the vest, okay?
Well,
Maybe that you haven't been able to get that you're really trying to get?
There's a lot on my list, but the 2 obvious ones that I've been asking for that has not been possible was Steely Dan Asia and Joni Mitchell Blue. I'm a fan of Joni Mitchell. Yeah.
And of course, Chad has his own pressing plants, so that's not a problem. You have to work with other pressing plants.
Yeah.
And there was a backup for a long time. Has it gotten better now?
Oh, yeah. Chad and I were just having a spirited discussion about this last night at dinner. Yes, it's a much better situation. It's back to like 2020, and get on press. And I work with RTI, who did amazing work for me over the years. And I had to make a change and went to God and Groove in Ohio. And I just big shout out to Matt Early and his team because he's the owner. I deal directly with him. He knows how I'm his most challenging customer.
That's right.
He enjoys the challenge most of the time.
Is he out there?
They're all here.
Well, I'm looking at that camera and hoping that the video actually makes it.
Don, you want to come up here?
But
Should have had Don up here.
And so, did any of you guys think about some obscure record that you happen to love that nobody knows about, that you're thinking, I want to make people aware of this record, so I'm going to put in the money and get the master and make this record, and, maybe lose a lot of money just to get it out there?
I've already done that.
Yeah, I would say every record, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Every project.
There's titles that I would like to do that I love personally, but I have to stop myself, you know what I mean? Because I know that people ain't gonna buy enough to make it. I'll lose money, and I've done some that I'm happy to lose a little money just to see it out. But there's a lot of titles I'd like to see that come out, but not everybody. Everybody wants to buy. I mean, we all do. We want to buy stuff we know the title, it's a classic. There's no question if you're making a mistake in the purchase. So a lot of people don't want to try new stuff or old stuff that they had never heard. But there's a ton of that stuff.
How about the difference between releasing mono records and stereo records? Because mono records can do very well, right? Like the Gillington that you take.
Well, it's the only way. It was recorded mono, and I love to tell the story about that one. And I have to. Fremer's the one that turned me on to that record. So when I can remember, I give credit when I can remember. Sometimes I just don't remember, but that one for sure. The Ellington Masterpieces. I sold more Ellington Masterpieces than T for the Tillerman. Wow. I mean, that to me is pretty incredible thing. And
where's my cut, man?
Excuse me? Oh, where's your cut? Yeah. We'll talk.
My cut is the pleasure of that record getting to so many people. That's my pleasure in all of that so many people enjoy that record.
Well, yeah, that's a good example of wanting to do a record that you like. And that one you could think that you might just barely break even on, but it actually was a success. But the thing about it, it was recorded in 1950, mono, and that you can't you can't play me a record between 1950 and 2024 that sounds better than that. In all those years, 74 years, we haven't been able to surpass that.
Why is that? Why?
Well, because it was simple. There wasn't that much, they kept it simple, and it wasn't a whole lot of like the modern.
I played that in Japan at a hi-fi show to a large crowd of people, and when it was over, I played just the first track, they stood up and applauded like it was a live performance. It was amazing.
We didn't get HDTV until the 2000s, but we had high definition in the grooves in the 50s.
Mike, I'd like to respond to something Chad said earlier. There's a lot of great music out there that's not served, but a lot of the audience or the fans, they like what they know, what they're comfortable with. And I wish they would, branch out and really experiment or try. One of the records that Impex has released, which sounds phenomenal, is Butt Shake Barefoot Adventure. Everybody kind of looks interesting, they walk away, they think it's a surf album because of the cover, and then I put it on and I get this jaw-dropping, where did this come from? There's so many great music, but it's not served. Everybody likes the same.
That's where a hi-fi show could come in really handy to bring in music to people, but it doesn't happen because most people keep playing the same old stuff, which is too bad, because I think you can actually present new music to people if you do it the right way.
Definitely. We have a new reel-to-reel release of all analog that's coming this year. With that exact thing in mind, newly recorded, newly all analog, released on reel.
Oh, cool.
And it's for this situation because we feel like it should be a new release again for this audience. Johnny on the solo piano.
And when you find out that a master tape is missing, do you ever go looking for it or asking around who might have it, or what do you think's happened to some of these tapes? That anybody know?
Are you talking about somebody in particular? I mean, of course we do. We go to the ends of the earth really to try to find some of it. I mean, if we think it exists, but as much as we fight for the master, a good safety copy or a good EQ copy or a safety copy, non-EQ is damn good. And if it's still in good shape, like if it's a great record, the tape copy sounds great, man, put it out. You know what I'm saying? Like
the impulses that you've done all sound amazingly good. And whether they're originals or one off the master, I don't know, but like Blues and Abstract Truth is just amazing.
I think that's a master. I'd say 90% of them are masters. But if the tape copy's good, but again, we try to get the masters if it's available. I know that people talk about the universal fire, and there's a lot of tapes that are missing, but there's so many more that are still available that people, like the Buddy Holly supposedly was burned. They weren't. The Skinnerd wasn't burned. The Steppenwolf wasn't burned. There's so many that in that article said was burned, and they're not. So
Misinformation on those articles.
well, it's a lot of information to have right because there's so many artists.
Yeah,
But
I'd say this is a distinction between what the deals put in place. And, I work with Kevin, Chris Bellman, and Ryan. All the, with the exception of Sony, who's got a policy, Kev, all those guys are vetted, insured, all that stuff. And if they've got them, they will send the masters. They make sure that they've got a high-res archive or copies. But if they've got a master, I find that they'll send it. Now, whether or not they've located it sometimes, which is literally just filing.
All my releases with Universal I'm still accessing the original master, the Bud Shank Elephant Mount, but the Sony is a flat transfer.
Yeah, what they've mandated is, so when, it's a little inside baseball maybe, but I've only been in this since 2015, but Sony would send tapes out of New York. Sterling used to cut vinyl in New York, so great choice. That's how I got to know Ryan Smith, because Ryan was cutting great vinyl. It's Sterling, New York. So when I worked with Sony, that's what I did. Then they changed, Sterling moved their vinyl cutting from New York to Nashville. And the bottom line is they won't send tapes out of New York. So next time I get a Sony title lined up, it'll be the same workflow that Andy does, which is getting a tape brought over to battery, getting it one-to-one, a flat transfer, a rate transfer, and then shipping that out to probably Cat.
And Mark Marlin knows what he's doing. He's been there a long time.
He was great. I used to always request for Mark to do my transferring, but he recently retired. Well,
Let's talk for a minute about the reel-to-reel tape thing that some of you were doing. How's that working? Are they selling?
Yes.
yeah, they sell some better than others. We had Nora Jones come away with me that sold really well, but of course everybody waited till it was gone to call me crying, like, I want it. I'm like, well, we had it for 4 years. It's like, but I was getting around to it. I'm like, yeah, all right, well, go on eBay. But, they sell all right. Like a couple hundred copies.
And so once someone buys a tape from you, what generation is that tape from off the master? Third generation, fourth generation?
Well, we have like the mastering engineer take the original master and then make an EQ'd copy. And then that copy, we make the one that we sell.
Correct. That's what we do.
But sometimes, if it's a 3-track tape, the copy that they give us is a master. Because if it goes from 3 to 2, the 2 is a master. If we make, like all the RCAs is one off the master. All the RCAs we've done. So, you just can't get better than that. Because it's one off the master. And then we just did we released 10 of our own blues records that we did. And I took the master, because we have 10 ATRs. So really 11, so we can make 10 at a time. So I ran 30. We only had to run my master 3 times to get 30 tapes. So all of those blues albums were actually selling one off the master. So if you buy those blues albums, it's one off the master. If you buy the RCAs, it's one off the master. Same with the We Get Requests, that was a 3-track tape, so it's one off the master. But usually it's the master, then the EQ tape copy, and then...
So why do so many of the major labels, when they do reissues, why do they compress the dynamics and ruin the records? Why do they do that? Do you know why they do that? Because they do that.
What'd you say?
Why do they do these remasters? The major labels, when they do their remaster, forget about the fact that they're digital copies, but they dynamically compress them. Why do you think they do that? The Band on the Run just came out. One of my writers gave me a good review. I bought a copy. It's not
What record?
Band on the Run. The Polar. It's dynamically compressed. It's not totally squashed, but it's like flat and the original sounds like real people playing instruments. And why do they do that?
Man, you really want me to say it right?
That's why I asked.
I mean, dude, like, there's a lot of people doing a lot of things, and they don't know.
You want to talk about the foreman with beards problem?
Well, hey, let me say that before we get to Foreman Beards or any other specific label. There are engineers who like that sound. I mean, let's face it, right? Like they think that that's, that's what those things should sound like, and making choices. And some of these guys have big names and get a lot of these big jobs. And I'm frankly shocked, and I will say this too. And I learned this, I used to work with Audio Quest, who made a really neat little USB stick down. I don't know what these people do for QC. What do they listen to the stuff on? And sometimes I've heard they used to listen to CDs that were burned and played on their car on the way home. Making decisions about mixes, about
I've had
mastering.
artists do that.
Yeah.
Where they're QCing my work in the car off of their phone.
Right. Yeah, so we started taking this little beautiful little USB stick back and hooking it in their computer, putting them in headphones. We're like, oh, wow, right? So a lot of it is like, they never hear it like we hear it.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Well, they don't know.
Yeah, they don't know.
think
They
it-
don't.
I don't know.
You know, Chad, there's the Verb by Request series that you're not involved with, fortunately for you.
Yeah, say that again.
And I don't know if you've heard any of those Verb by Request records, but there's some really good titles. And the guy that's cutting them is doing it fixed pitch at a very low level. And they sound horrible. He shouldn't be doing that. I don't want to mention names, but Ken Drucker should be told not to put those records on.
Hey, man, I don't even try to tell them what to do because they ain't gonna listen to me anyway.
But this is more room for us than, the thing that I always pitch when I'm talking to the labels, there's room for all of us. What I'm always constantly amazed at is putting the deals together is we're basically going to them and saying, we want to give you money for your IP. Are you willing to take our money?
Yeah.
And the answer more often than not, shockingly, is no.
No.
They want to try to do it all themselves. And this phenomenon we're talking about, putting out inferior product, you can't put everything out and do it well.
Yeah.
And the labels lately, there's a lot of young people working there and experienced people. They don't know much about the original music, let alone what hi-fi is supposed to sound like, what fidelity of the source or anything is. So, that's what I keep pitching is like, hey, there's actually room for all this out there. There is room for, lower quality $20 records. If there's a market for that, and then we've got a premium market. And I'm like, we coexist. It's not mutually exclusive at all.
They won't. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I always also try to go back to original sources and original engineers and source out as many people involved with all the projects and with the label itself and with the technology that we have in the studio as possible. Because then you work with those people, you work with how they work, and then you bring that into what we're doing now and you combine those things. That's just my goal. I always try to do that.
Go ahead.
I try to do the same as Julie. We try to incorporate, and we reach out to the original engineers, the artists, the estate. We try to incorporate them into our project and get their involvement. And we try to show the label that we can all collaborate and have different markets. But I can also say from first-hand experience, some of these new people coming onto the label, they're green. I've had reps at labels have asked me, what is the legal line? I'm like, that's what you're supposed to give me, not me give you.
Why don't you talk about how sometimes you have to release records at 45 because the 33 license is held by somebody. You had to do Judy Sill at 45 because Four Men with Beards is a label that the people involved have really good musical taste.
Are they still in business?
What's that?
Four Men's and Beards still?
I think.
I've been told that when I ask,
Okay,
I
I've
say,
been seeing-
like Judy, when I brought those records back, I said,
How many is that? 5, 6, 7 years ago?
And they've locked up the licensing right on titles.
Yeah, well, and that depends. And I don't want to, throw any shade at the way the labels operate. But in some cases, it's pretty exclusive, right? So if somebody licenses a title like the Judies in the early 2000s, locks up the 33s, the label will not license you the black 33. So you'd have to do color, you'd have to do 45s or something. In Judy's case, I decided to do 40. I said, her music kind of deserves that extra that you can get with 45, and I think it plays well with the program material, stuff like that. So yeah, that's how that works. It's kind of almost like a format type thing, right?
But you had
But then they ask for ridiculous commitments, even when you do the 45 color track, they ask for ridiculous commitment numbers.
Yeah, so in what Abe is referring to is the way that, again, a little inside baseball, but, you're always going to them and the deals are put together based on a unit guarantee, a total number over the life of the deal, a certain number of represses and stuff like that. And there's definitely a scale with what it costs.
Let's talk about that, because we haven't talked about that, about the deals you guys have to make you don't have that problem. You're a tough little thing.
I need to make more records. That's the only problem.
You do whatever you want. You're like New Jersey, you do whatever you want. So, but you guys have to sign these contracts, and you have to commit to a minimum number of records and pay that money regardless of what happens. You have to pay that. So how does that
That's what guarantee means.
Tell people how that works.
Yeah, so it's funny because there was, 10 years ago, then there were the deals that got made during the vinyl crunch a couple of years ago, and everything went kind of crazy, and people were getting, basically paid to sit at home and order music on the internet, which is great in some respects, and in others. But that's really it. The deal is, they're either a manufacturing deal, which is where they give you an all-in price per unit. You tell them the pressing plant, they price it, and for X amount of dollars, you get black 180 from this pressing plant. It either does or doesn't include the labels, all the royalties and publishing rights and mechanicals and all that. Or you do a licensing deal where it gets kind of broken up and all your licensing is to use the master, but they're all based on, the parts of it that are the same are you're guaranteeing a certain number of units over the life of the deal, a certain opening order. And one of the things that changes the opening order.
The opening order now is pretty much your licensing deal sometimes.
Yeah.
So it used to be you guarantee X amount of units over 3 years. Now that 3 years is shortened, and then the opening order can start at 1,000, 1,500. But now for me, a lot of the licensing opening order is the guarantee for over the time. So anything over that is bonus for them.
Yeah, those are the good
And then
ones.
now we're doing our own mechanicals and all that versus
Is the lawyering and all this expensive?
the what?
The lawyering, you've got to contracts, you have to have lawyers, that add a lot of money to the.
Yeah, we have a lawyer on staff, and they review all the contracts and.
I play lawyer on TV, so I roll my own in that respect.
You don't need a lawyer for most of it. I mean, you just see if the numbers work out for you.
I work with a lawyer. For some, I'm sorry, I work with a lawyer, and with some of the things that are more standard, it's like Chad, you just kind of, it's interesting though, because what I find is that the artists I work with, they're finding that vinyl is easier to get now, which we know is easier. So I'm trying to say, but listen, you need to increase your numbers. You need to make more. You need to not make like a ridiculously small amount. They're like, well, I can take this many and I can repress again, but I'm like, no, it'll sound bad. But also, it's just not how you want to do business. You need to be professional and have bigger numbers about it, because there's this advent of easier to make vinyl. So now I'm trying to like get people to make more because it's a better business model.
Well, let me say this: ours are always in the low thousands, right? These guarantees and stuff, and there is, Chad's got some, some A-list titles, some other stuff that's got a bigger ceiling, but premium pricing is, something of a ceiling, right? So there's a realistic area where we all operate, we know what it is. And to give you an example, the other thing that used to be dictated by these deals is the minimum number for a repress, right?
Yeah.
So when you're 3 years into it, 3 years into a record, and you got the big hit from it, you're looking to repress it. 500 used to be the number, and that's a nice number. When it starts to go to 1,000 or go higher, you put all the money out, and there isn't going to be the big pop there is when you have something new and you put a pre-order out. That money comes back over time. Those parts of it, you know, the SACDs we're talking about. When they try to take that number on me and make it go from 500 for a reorder to 1,000 on something I've already sold a couple thousand of and had in the market for 3 years, God, it kills me because it's still selling. But if I've got to throw out like thousands of dollars that's only going to come back to me over the next 3 years, more
And
slow,
Shane,
that's
the contract is also short. Time of the contract, the renewals have also shortened. When you were mentioning lawyers, you know, for Impex, you know, like we've been doing a lot of we've been promoting a lot of the one step. The one steps are reissue, but we also add bonus materials, artwork. We've hired historians to write liner notes. But when you talk about contract, the base contract is that I'm licensing from them, so they own everything. But all this material that I created, that we've spent a year or two putting together, it's our work. But on the contract, they're saying, you know, hey, this is also now part of mine. And that's where the lawyers come in, and we really have to push back all the time.
And that's a really important point too, because deluxe editions, you bring a lot to it as far as that packaging, and it's completely different than the master use, of
But
course.
to get to Gilberto one step, we have the universal liner notes, we have things that they provided, but all the stuff, the liner notes from Monica herself, you know, the historian Chuck wrote, the background of the making, all the photos, it can't be theirs. But now in the master contract, now that all belongs to them. So it's like, no.
I had a title that was from, you'll love this, it was a late 90s title that was recorded 24-bit digital live recording. And you're gonna love this, but the perfect sound forever, the digital, the files had already started to go bad. So we had to work on it. I had to, pay a studio time. You're gonna love this.
Who is it? Put 'em on
So
speaker.
you're gonna love this. They bounced it out to analog and made a safety, and we had to make a new master. And the repairs actually came from an analog tape for the new digital master, which is great. But to Amy's point, the label ended up with some ownership of that, and that new master got licensed out to a different label.
Well, Saturday night in San Francisco, that streaming.
So I paid for that. I paid for all the studio.
That's my master.
Yeah.
Now they own it.
Right.
So like what kind of inventory do you sit on all the time? A large amount of money that you just have to sit on in inventory?
It's like the dragon in the Hobbit thing. I sit on large piles of treasure and gold.
Yeah, I feel that
Roll
way.
around.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So are you all cleaning up in this reissue business? Is it like making you rich? Or are you doing it for the love and the money?
I'm doing it for love, and hopefully it helps more than it hurts as far as the household finances go personally.
I have been obsessed for the last 5 years with excess inventory, and I have found that I'm getting to the point where I'm like, okay, I have to just sort of let some of that go, because I need to get into new projects, and I can't just be like thinking about, I have to be realistic, but there is a point, and I've reached it.
As far as distribution goes, so obviously the online distribution is through the big three, let's call them.
I'm a little different. I'm really focused on my direct sales business, because for small, I've got no partners, no money people, it's just me. So I'm very focused on that. Oh, give me 5 cents. But I've got my own Amazon store, which helps a lot. And yeah, Chad's one of the best, if not my best customer.
Is that right?
You guys do great.
It's good to hear.
Well, we have to wind it up. I've been told we have to wind it up. So I just want to say, if any of you have not seen the video that I shot at Universal's vault in Pittsburgh, the Iron Mountain Vault, you should check that out. It's an amazing video. It's on the Tracking Angle YouTube channel. Thank you. That's a professional plug. And anyway, I think we all have to thank these people for doing what they do. They're right, and they're dedicated to it, and we thank God we have them doing what they do. Thank you all for coming.
Please like and subscribe for more audiophile content.